Horus versus Emperor. The full fight. A father's hand reaches toward his son. Not to embrace, to annihilate. 10,000 years of human history balance on a knife's edge aboard a corrupted flagship. The Emperor of mankind hesitates. His son Horus does not. And in that single heartbeat of mercy, everything burns. This is not a battle between two warriors. This is the death of hope itself. The precise moment when humanity's brightest possible future collapsed into its darkest eternal nightmare. When a father who had never loved anything was forced to murder the one son he loved most. Picture holy Terra, the cradle of mankind, a world that has survived ice ages and atomic fire and the collapse of civilization itself. Now it burns. The Imperial Palace stretches across continents, a fortress-cathedral that took decades and billions of lives to construct. Its walls reach toward the sky like prayers made solid. And those walls are crumbling. Bodies carpet every surface. Golden-armored custodians lie broken beside the space marines they once commanded. Demons feast on the fallen. The sky weeps fire and ash and things that should not exist. Above it all, hanging in low orbit like a diseased moon, sits the Vengeful Spirit, the Warmaster's flagship, once the proudest vessel in humanity's armada, now a wound in reality itself, bleeding corruption into the void. This moment cost everything to reach. 9 Space Marine legions have turned traitor. 9 brotherhoods of superhuman warriors, each one capable of conquering star systems alone, now serve the dark gods of chaos. Billions have died. Worlds that stood for centuries have been reduced to cinders. The Great Crusade, humanity's desperate attempt to reclaim the galaxy from alien horrors and forgotten nightmares, has become something far worse. They call it the Horus Heresy now, the most catastrophic civil war in the history of any species. And at the heart of it all stands a father who cannot accept what his son has become. The Emperor of mankind is not human. He has not been human for 40,000 years, if he ever truly was. His psychic power could shatter planets. His mind has guided humanity through extinction events that would have ended any other species. He has never known fear. He has never known doubt. He has never known the simple, terrible weight of loving something he might have to destroy. Until Horus Lupercal, the Warmaster, the favorite son, the one Primarch the Emperor raised with his own hands, taught with his own words, loved with whatever passed for a heart in that ancient and terrible being. Throughout this entire war, the Emperor has refused to face Horus directly. He sent others. He hoped. He believed, against all evidence, that redemption remained possible. But Terra's final defenses are collapsing. The traitor forces will achieve complete victory within hours. The Emperor can delay no longer. He boards a Stormbird gunship with the last of his elite warriors, Custodians in golden armor, the shattered remnants of the Blood Angels, their angelic Primarch Sanguinius, barely standing after holding the palace gates alone for hours. They ascend through burning atmosphere toward that corrupted moon of steel and malice. And somewhere in the depths of the Vengeful Spirit, Horus waits. His face is no longer the face his father remembers. 4 gods have carved their symbols into his flesh. Warp fire crawls across armor that was once proudly worn in humanity's service. He sits upon a throne of bone and screaming metal, and he smiles. Because he knows his father is coming. He has always known. The golden gauntlet, the psychic fire crackling between armored fingers, the tear streaming down a corrupted cheek. That image will echo through 10,000 years of human suffering. But to understand why it matters, why this single moment of violence would poison humanity forever, one must first understand something else. How did a son so beloved become a monster so terrible that his own father would weep while erasing him from existence. To understand the fall, one must first understand the height from which he fell. Horus was not just one of 20 sons, he was the first found. While his brothers were scattered across the galaxy, raised by alien beasts, brutal warlords, or noble kings, Horus was discovered on the gang-haunted twilight world of Chthoniya, a planet of tunnels and mines, where loyalty was a knife in the dark and strength was the only law. The Emperor of Mankind descended into that darkness and found not a feral child, but a prodigy of violence and charisma. He took the boy and, unlike any of the others who would follow, raised him by his own hand. Where other Primarchs would eventually meet a distant golden god, Horus grew up knowing a father. He was tutored personally. He walked the decks of the Emperor's flagship not as a subordinate, but as an heir. He learned strategy and statecraft at the Emperor's side, privy to secrets and philosophies shared with no one else. While his brother, Lionel Johnson, was wrestling monsters in a dark forest, Horus was debating military doctrine with the Master of Mankind. While Robert Guilliman was learning administration on Macragge, Horus was helping to shape the very structure of the Great Crusade. This bond was unique, absolute, and deeply felt. The Emperor, a being so ancient and powerful that emotion was a forgotten language, seemed to rediscover it with Horus. He saw in this son the best of humanity, the perfect vessel for his grand design. Horus, in turn, adored his father with a totality that bordered on worship. He was the Emperor's light, his Warmaster in waiting, the brilliant, shining sun who could do no wrong. And so, after 2 centuries of glorious conquest, when the Great Crusade had pushed back the darkness across 1,000,000 worlds, the Emperor made a decision. He would return to Terra. A secret project, he explained, one that would secure humanity's ultimate salvation and render the dangers of the galaxy obsolete. He needed someone to lead the crusade in his absence. He did not choose Sanguinius, the beloved angel. He did not choose the lion, the peerless duelist. He did not choose Guilliman, the master empire builder. Before the assembled might of the Imperium on the conquered world of Ulanor, the Emperor of Mankind removed the mantle of command from his own shoulders and placed it upon Horus. He named him Warmaster, first among equals, supreme commander of all of humanity's armies. It was the greatest honor ever bestowed upon a mortal man, and it was a death sentence. The moment the Emperor departed, the seeds of destruction began to sprout. Horus's brothers, his equals, were now his subordinates. Some accepted it with grace, others with a jealousy that curdled into hatred. Perturabo, the bitter lord of the Iron Warriors, saw it as the ultimate insult. Angron, the broken gladiator, sneered at the title. And in the shadows, men like Lorgar and his chaplain Erebus, secret converts to the worship of chaos, saw their opportunity. They began to whisper in the Warmaster's ear, "Why did he leave you? Why is his project on Terra more important than the crusade you now lead? What is this future he is building, and does it include you and your brothers?" Horus, for all his brilliance, felt the weight of it all, the pressure of 1,000,000 worlds, the burden of command, and a cold, growing dread in his heart. The fear of a son who has been given everything and now feels, for the first time, the chill of abandonment. He didn't fall because he was weak or wicked. He fell because he loved his father so completely that the perception of betrayal was a wound no armor could stop. The Chaos Gods did not have to corrupt a monster. They only had to find the one perfect crack in the heart of a devoted son. The trap was set on a world that was already rotting from the inside. Davin, A jungle moon promised to Horus's legion as a prize had festered in his absence. Its warrior lodges, once allies, had turned to darker powers. The planetary governor, a man Horus had once called friend, was now a bloated puppet of ruin. It was during the assault on the governor's fortress that the moment came. In the chaos of battle, Horus was struck. The blade was a sliver of obsidian-like material, an alien thing called the Kinebrak Anatham. The wound itself was trivial, a shallow cut on his shoulder that a normal man might ignore. For a Primarch, it should have been less than an inconvenience. But as Horus pulled the blade free, he felt a coldness that had nothing to do with metal. It was a spiritual poison. Aboard the Vengeful Spirit, the greatest apothecaries of the sons of Horus worked frantically. Their science, capable of rebuilding a space marine from scraps of tissue, was useless. The wound, a small black puncture, would not close. Instead, it wept a foul, oily substance. Dark, corrupted veins began to spread from the site, crawling across the Primarch's demigod physique like black lightning. Horus fell into a coma, his body burning with a fever that defied diagnosis, and his mind lost to delirious nightmares. His sons, the most powerful warriors in the galaxy, could do nothing but watch their father, their gene-sire, die by inches. It was in this climate of absolute desperation that the Serpent Lodge made their offer. The priests, led by the honey-tongued Erebus of the Word-Bearers, spoke of ancient rites, of spiritual healing beyond the grasp of imperial science. They promised a cure. To the Mournival, Horus's inner circle, it sounded like heresy. But as they stood over their dying Primarch, his breathing growing shallower, their options vanished. With heavy hearts, and against all protocol, they consented. They carried their father's comatose body to the lodge's sanctum, a basalt temple reeking of incense and forbidden knowledge, and delivered him into the hands of his betrayers. What happened next did not occur in the physical world. As the chanting began, Horus's soul was ripped from his body and flung into the madness of the warp. He found himself standing not on Davin, but on Terra, in a future that was a blasphemous parody of everything he had fought for. The sky was choked with the smoke of sacrificial pyres. The Imperial Palace was a continent-spanning cathedral where trillions of robed fanatics screamed prayers to a single enthroned god, his father. Statues of the Emperor, 10,000 feet tall, stared down with cold, merciless eyes. A voice, or perhaps 1,000 voices, whispered around him. It showed him the fate of his brothers. Their statues were defaced, their names erased from history, their legions purged or forgotten. They were inconvenient truths, discarded tools from a bygone era. The voice showed him the Emperor's secret project on Terra, not a salvation for humanity, but the mechanism for his own ascension to godhood. This was the lie, grand and terrible, but it was wrapped in a devastating truth. The voice reminded Horus of his father's sudden departure, of the secrets he refused to share, of his hypocrisy in demanding absolute faith while offering none in return. He warned you of gods, the voices hissed, while planning to become one himself. He forbade you knowledge of the warp, leaving you blind and vulnerable to the very powers he fought. He used you. Your love, your loyalty, your victories, all of it was just fuel for his ambition. In the roiling chaos of the immaterium, wounded, afraid, and feeling utterly abandoned, Horus could no longer see the line between truth and deception. The love he had for his father curdled into the galaxy's most profound hatred. He was offered a choice: serve a tyrant in heaven, or reign with them in hell. He would not serve. Back in the temple, his body convulsed. The black veins receded, the wound on his shoulder sealed, leaving no scar. Horus's eyes snapped open. They were no longer the warm, charismatic eyes of the Emperor's favored son. They were cold, ancient, and blazing with the fires of the warp. The thing that sat up on the stone slab wore Horus's face, but it was no longer him. The Warmaster was healed. The son was dead. The weapon that wore Horus's face moved with the speed of a striking serpent. With the Warmaster's authority, he gathered 4 full legions to the Istvan system, claiming a local rebellion needed to be crushed. On the surface of Istvan III, he deployed the forces he knew would never join his treason, the Terran-born veterans of his own legion, the stoic Death Guard, the flamboyant Emperor's children, and the grizzled World Eaters. Men who had fought beside him for 2 centuries. He then gave the order. From orbit, his fleet unleashed a virus bombardment. The Life Eater virus turned the planet's atmosphere into a slurry of flammable vapor, dissolving flesh from bone in seconds. Millions of loyal space marines died screaming, betrayed by the very father figure they had followed into hell 100 times. Then came the firestorm, a single orbital lance igniting the atmosphere, incinerating the planet and turning its surface to black glass. The heresy had begun not with a battle, but with an act of unimaginable fratricide. But even that was just a prelude. The true masterstroke of his new, cruel genius came at Istvan V. He broadcast a call for aid, luring 3 loyalist legions, the Iron Hands, the Raven Guard, and the Salamanders, into a trap. They made planetfall in a blasted ravine, known as the Urgal Depression, expecting to link up with reinforcements. Instead, they were met by the 4 legions Horus had already purged of their loyalists. The battle was a brutal, grinding affair, but the loyalists held their own. Then the second wave of reinforcements arrived. 4 more legions, led by the Iron Warriors and the Word-Bearers. They landed behind the loyalist lines, and for a moment, it looked like salvation. But when they opened fire, their guns were aimed not at the traitors, but at the backs of their brothers. The dropsite massacre was not a battle, it was an execution. Trapped between 8 traitor legions, the loyalists were annihilated. In the heart of the carnage, the Primarch Fulgrim, now a creature of decadent cruelty, faced his once closest brother, Ferrus Manus. Their duel was short and terrible, ending with Fulgrim taking his brother's head in a single, tear-streaked blow. The galaxy burned. The heresy was not merely a military rebellion, it was a spiritual infection. The traitor legions became twisted parodies of their former selves. The Word-Bearers, once punished for their faith, now became demon-tongued prophets, spreading the worship of chaos as a liberating truth. The Emperor's children, seeking perfection, descended into a nightmare of sensory excess, carving symphonies from screaming flesh and finding art in agony. The World Eaters, already brutal, gave themselves over entirely to the blood god, their armor painted not with legion colors, but with layers of dried gore. Horus commanded this orchestra of damnation, his tactical brilliance now a tool for cosmic ruin, turning entire sectors of space into playgrounds for demons. And on Terra, the Emperor could do nothing. He was a prisoner in his own palace, trapped by an act of love. His son, Magnus the Red, in a desperate attempt to warn him of Horus's betrayal, had shattered the psychic wards protecting the Emperor's secret webway project, humanity's only hope for a future, free from the dangers of the warp. Demons, endless and ravenous, now poured through the breach deep beneath the Imperial Palace. The Emperor was forced to sit upon the golden throne, not as a ruler, but as a psychic dam, his will the only thing holding back a tide of hell that would otherwise consume Terra whole. He could not leave. He could not fight. He could only watch the light of his Imperium be extinguished, star by star. The remaining loyalists were scattered, fighting a losing war on 1,000 fronts. Sanguinius and his blood angels raced for Terra, a desperate reinforcement. Robout Guilliman tried to fortify his own realm of Ultramar, a bastion against the coming darkness. The Lion hunted traitors in the galactic shadows, but Horus was always a step ahead, his plans layered with traps and contingencies. For 7 years the war raged, a meat grinder that consumed worlds and butchered heroes. Finally, the time came. The sky above Holy Terra tore open, not with the clean light of a starship's arrival, but with a weeping, diseased wound in reality. From it emerged Horus's armada, 8 traitor legions, legions of corrupted titans, billions of fanatical cultists, and a demonic host that blotted out the stars. The siege of Terra had begun, and every tactical projection, every logical assessment, showed that the Imperium was doomed to fall. The siege of Terra had lasted for months, and each second was an eternity of damnation. The Imperial Palace, once a monument to a species reaching for the stars, was now its tombstone. It was a fortress that spanned a continent, with walls that scraped the heavens and void shields that could shrug off the wrath of suns. But against the combined fury of 8 traitor legions and the gods they served, it broke. It fell apart piece by agonizing piece. Kilometer-high battlements were ground to dust. Sprawling plazas, where 1 billion souls could have gathered in celebration, were now corpse fields, slick with the mingled blood of loyalists and traitors. The skeletal husks of god engines, mighty titans, lay tangled in the ruins like fallen idols, their funeral pyres painting the smoke-choked sky in shades of orange and black. The air itself was a toxic soup of promethium, ozone, and the coppery tang of industrial-scale slaughter. In this unending nightmare, one light held back the dark: Sanguinius. The great angel, primarch of the blood angels, became the living embodiment of defiance. Where the line buckled, he appeared, a figure of impossible grace and terrible fury, his white wings a beacon in the gloom. He moved through the battle like a verse of poetry written in blood, his spear a golden comet, his sword a song of righteous death. He slew greater demons that had terrorized galaxies, breaking their backs over his knee and casting their foul essences back into the warp. He inspired mortals to fight beyond fear, to hold their ground with empty guns and broken blades, to die with his name on their lips as a prayer. But Sanguinius knew. His curse, the gift of foresight that had haunted him since his youth, had shown him the end. He had seen his own death 1,000 times, in 1,000 different ways, but always at the hands of the same man. His brother, Horus. Every daemon he killed, every breach he sealed, every life he saved was just one more step on the path to his own murder. There was no future where he survived this day. He fought anyway. His was not the courage of one who hopes to win, but the far greater courage of one who knows he will lose everything and chooses to stand. The moment of ultimate sacrifice came at the Eternity Gate, the final bastion before the Emperor's own throne room. From his flagship, Horus focused his immense, god-fueled power and tore a hole in reality itself. It wasn't a gate, it was a wound, a screaming vortex of raw chaos that disgorged a tidal wave of demons. The Custodian Guard, the Emperor's own companions, were overwhelmed. The line was not breaking, it was dissolving. It was then that Sanguinius made his stand. For hours, he stood alone in the breach, a solitary angel against an infinite sea of monsters. He bought time with his blood, with the lives of his sanguinary guard who died at his feet, with every last ounce of his transhuman strength. The breach was eventually sealed, the final defense of Terra secured. But the cost was Sanguinius. When his brothers found him, He was shattered. His golden armor was rent and blackened. His wings were torn and blood-matted, his body broken. He was alive, but only just. Deep within the Sanctum Imperialis, the Emperor felt it all. He felt Sanguinius's agony. He saw the tactical displays screaming of imminent, total collapse. Defeat was not weeks or days away. It was hours. And then, a new signal cut through the psychic static. A message, clear as a bell. Aboard the Vengeful Spirit, the shields had been lowered. It was an invitation. A taunt. A challenge from a son to his father. The choice was made. The dam had to break. The Emperor rose, his psychic presence a nova of golden light. He gathered what remained of his ultimate guardians. Constantine Valdor, Captain General of the Custodes, his golden armor scarred, but his will unbroken. Captain Sigismund of the Imperial Fists, the Emperor's champion, his face a mask of cold fury. The last of the Huskarls, the Emperor's personal guard. And then, a broken figure stumbled forward, refusing to be left behind. Sanguinius, leaning on his blade, his breath a ragged gasp, insisted he go. He would face his brother. He would walk to his death, because it was his duty. With his final depleted retinue assembled, the Emperor prepared to cast the die. They would not fight their way to Horus. They would teleport directly into the monster's throne room and end the war with a single, decisive decapitation. The transition from reality to hell was instantaneous. One moment, the Emperor's retinue stood in the sanctum on Terra, braced for a teleport strike. The next, they were torn apart and scattered into a nightmare. The precision of the teleportation was deliberately corrupted. The strike force atomized and flung across the Vengeful Spirit not as a cohesive spearhead, but as isolated, terrified sparks of light in an infinite darkness. This was not a warship anymore. It was a pocket dimension, a temple to the ruinous powers, where the laws of physics were a blasphemous joke. Corridors of living flesh pulsed around them, their walls weeping black ichor. Gravity would invert without warning, sending warriors tumbling into ceilings that had become floors, now covered in grasping, spectral hands. A hallway would stretch into an impossible Mobius strip horizon, only to fold in on itself, trapping those within. Time lost all meaning. A custodian might live 1,000 years of failure in the span of a single heartbeat, his mind assaulted by visions of every mistake he had ever made, every duty he had ever failed. Blood angels found themselves facing phantoms of their own fallen brothers, their voices twisted into demonic mockeries, whispering of the red thirst and the black rage, tempting them to damnation. The very air was a weapon, thick with the psychic screams of the damned and the triumphant laughter of thirsting gods. The ship was alive, and it hated them with the passion of a living universe. Yet through this labyrinth of madness, one being moved with the terrifying certainty of a glacier. The Emperor. Where his golden light fell, the unnatural architecture of the ship recoiled. Demons that could unmake star systems shrieked and fled from his path, their ephemeral forms dissolving like mist in the sun. Corrupted Astartes, their armor warped into baroque monstrosities, charged him with howls of devotion to their new gods, only to be reduced to screaming statues of ash by a mere glance. The warp itself, the very substance of this hell, pulled away from him, unable to bear the touch of the anathema. But even as he carved a path of absolute destruction, he held back. His power was a supernova held in check, a killing blow he refused to deliver to the ship itself, because somewhere in this abyss was his son. He was not here to destroy the vessel. He was here to find Horus. His path was marked by a trail of bodies. He walked through corridors carpeted with the golden armor of the Custodes and the red plate of the Blood Angels. These were not mere soldiers. These were his companions, his guardians, men who had stood beside him for centuries. He saw a huscarl, one of his own personal guard, impaled on a spear of bone that had erupted from the deck. He saw a squad of the sanguinary guard, their angelic wings torn from their backs, their bodies arranged in a profane mockery of a holy symbol. Each fallen warrior was a fresh wound in the Emperor's soul, another testament to the cost of this rebellion, another reason to hope that redemption was still possible, that their sacrifice might not be in vain. But one of his sons outpaced him. Through sheer, agonizing force of will, Sanguinius navigated the impossible maze. He was not immune to its horrors. The visions tore at his mind. The shifting reality battered his broken body. But his purpose was a lodestone, pulling him towards his preordained fate. He was not fighting his way through. He was enduring his way through, drawn by the invisible string of destiny that connected him to Horus. Bleeding, shattered, and utterly alone, the angel burst through a final, shimmering portal of energy and found himself in the Lupercal's court. The throne room. There, upon a throne of twisted metal and screaming faces, sat the Warmaster. Horus Lupercal, wreathed in an aura of multi-hued corruption, looked down at the broken form of his brother. The angel's arrival was not a surprise. It was an appointment. Horus smiled, a ghastly, knowing expression on his transfigured face. He gestured with the talon of Horus, its lightning claws still dripping with the memory of 1,000 atrocities. He offered Sanguinius a place at his side. Join him. Serve the true powers of the galaxy. Live. For a moment, the future splintered. A path to survival opened. Sanguinius, who knew with absolute certainty that he was standing in his own grave, looked at the monster that had once been his most beloved brother, and refused. His life was not worth his soul. The fight was not a contest of equals. It was a clash between a memory and a god. Sanguinius, the great angel, moved with a speed that defied the agony of his broken body. He was a streak of gold and white light against the oppressive darkness of the Lupercal's court, his wings beating the corrupted air into submission. His spear of Telesto, a weapon that had slain tides of aliens and demons, became a blur of killing intent. It struck Horus's chestplate, the force of the impact cracking the corrupted ceramite and drawing a gout of black, steaming ichor. For a single, glorious second, hope flared. The angel was landing blows. The monster could be hurt, but Horus was no longer just a Primarch. He was an engine of cosmic hatred, a vessel for the combined, infinite malice of 4 malevolent gods. The wound Sanguinius inflicted closed as quickly as it was opened, the flesh knitting back together with an unnatural fluidity. Horus didn't even flinch. He absorbed the blow, as a mountain absorbs a raindrop. Every attack Sanguinius launched, every desperate, brilliant maneuver he executed, was met with an immovable wall of raw, impossible power. The Chaos Gods were not merely lending Horus their strength, they were fighting through him, their power a torrent that Sanguinius was trying to hold back with a dam made of his own blood and bone. The throne room itself seemed to join the assault. The faces screaming from the walls turned their vacant eyes upon the angel, whispering his deepest fears, the black rage that haunted his sons, the curse of his foresight, the futility of his sacrifice. The deck beneath his feet became slick with phantom blood, trying to trip him, to slow his angelic grace. Sanguinius fought on, his movements a masterclass in Primarch-level combat. But the power gap was not a gap. It was a chasm. He could feel his strength failing, his movements growing a fraction of a second slower. His premonition of death, once a hazy vision of a possible future, now crystallized into a cold, hard certainty. He looked into Horus's eyes and saw nothing of the brother he once loved. He saw only the abyss. With a final desperate surge, Sanguinius drove his spear forward one last time. Horus caught it, not with his hand, but with the crackling, energized talons of his monstrous claw. With a contemptuous twist, he snapped the ancient spear in two. The angel was disarmed. In the same motion, Horus lunged, his speed now a terrifying mockery of his brother's. The talon of Horus closed around Sanguinius's throat, lifting the golden primarch from his feet. Their eyes met, one last time. In Sanguinius's, there was no fear, only defiance, and a deep, profound sorrow for the brother who was lost. In Horus's, there was only a cold, predatory triumph. Then, with a roar that was part primarch, part demon, and part laughing god, Horus brought Sanguinius down across his knee. The sound of a spine breaking, the spine of a demigod, was a wet, final crack that echoed through the unnatural silence of the chamber. The Angel of Baal, the hope of the Imperium, went limp. Horus tossed the body aside like a broken toy. At that exact moment, the great adamantium doors to the throne room ceased to exist. They didn't open. They didn't buckle. They vaporized in a silent, blinding flash of golden energy. Light, pure and absolute, poured into the chamber, a cleansing fire that sent the shadows screaming back into the corners. The psychic pressure was immense, a physical force that scoured the demonic filth from the very air. The Emperor of Mankind had arrived. He stood in the entryway, a figure of incandescent wrath, his burning sword in hand. His gaze swept the room, and then it fell upon the crumpled, golden form lying discarded on the deck. He saw the broken wings, the shattered armor, the still, lifeless face of his most perfect son. And for the first time in millennia, the being who had conquered worlds and mastered the secrets of existence felt something inside of him shatter. Sanguinius had not just been a son, he had been the living proof that the Emperor's dream for humanity was possible. His death was not just a loss, it was the death of hope itself. The Emperor stood across the body of his murdered son and faced the monster who was once his most beloved. The contrast was absolute. The Emperor was a figure of pure, blinding light, his golden armor a vessel for the psychic energy of a sun. He was the physical manifestation of order, reason, and humanity's highest potential. Horus was his inversion. His armor, once the proud sea green of the sons of Horus, was now black, warped, and covered in blasphemous runes that pulsed with a malevolent inner fire. 4 distinct, chaotic symbols were carved into his flesh, each one a screaming portal to a different hell. He was bloated with power, barely recognizable as the primarch he had been, a conduit for the raw, untamed madness of the warp. Between them, Sanguinius's body was a silent, terrible accusation. For a moment that stretched into an eternity, they didn't move. Then, the Emperor spoke, his voice not a shout of rage, but a low, resonant wave of psychic grief that filled the chamber. "Horus, my son, is any part of you left in there to hear me?" He extended a hand, not in aggression, but as a plea. "Fight it. Cast off these puppet masters. This is not you. It is not too late. There can still be forgiveness." The being wearing Horus's face threw back its head and laughed. It was not Horus's laugh. It was a chorus of 4 distinct, divine insanities, a sound that scraped at the fabric of reality itself. "Forgiveness," the voice hissed, layered and corrupt. "You offer me forgiveness after your lifetime of lies?" The talon of Horus, still dripping with Sanguinius's blood, gestured accusatorily. "You hid the truth of the galaxy from us. You used us as tools, to be discarded when your great work was done. You sought godhood for yourself, and left us nothing but the promise of being forgotten. I have seen the future you planned for us, Father. I have seen the corpse emperor on his throne, worshipped by the blind fools you so despise. I chose a different path. The time for words was over. With a silent scream of psychic force, the emperor launched himself forward. Horus met him with a roar. Their first impact was not the clang of metal on metal, but a detonation of pure power. The throne room buckled. The screaming faces in the walls went silent, blasted into oblivion by the sheer force of their collision. The Emperor's flaming sword, an artifact that could unmake demons with a touch, met the crackling claws of the Talon. Golden fire warred against baleful warp energy. The Emperor was faster, his skill honed over 30,000 years of unremembered conflict. His blade was a blur, landing a dozen blows in the space of a single heartbeat. One strike sliced deep into Horus's shoulder. Another opened a gash across his chest that boiled with golden light. But it meant nothing. The Chaos Gods poured their essence into their champion. Flesh knitted back together, armor reformed, and the wounds vanished as if they were illusions. Horus fought with the brutal strength of a demigod amplified by cosmic hatred. He swung Worldbreaker, his massive power mace, in an arc that could shatter mountains. The Emperor parried, the impact sending shockwaves that cracked the very deck plates. But then the Talon came, a blindingly fast counterstrike. The energized claws tore through the Emperor's golden armor, gouging deep into the flesh beneath. For the first time in memory, the master of mankind bled. The mace followed, a crushing blow that shattered ribs and sent the Emperor stumbling back. But through it all, the Emperor hesitated. Each time his sword was poised for a killing blow, each time he had an opening to unleash the full, terrifying extent of his psychic might, he pulled back. He looked into Horus's eyes that burned with the fires of the warp, and he searched for his son. He saw a flicker of the boy he had found on Chthoniya. He saw a ghost of the general who had won 1,000 victories in his name. He saw the face of the son he had loved more than any other. He could not bring himself to annihilate that memory. He fought to contain, to subdue, to wound. He fought to save his son. Horus, empowered by gods who knew nothing of love, fought only to kill his father. The Emperor's love for his son was a vulnerability the Chaos Gods had spent years cultivating, and now they exploited it without mercy. Horus, unburdened by hesitation, pressed his attack. The Talon of Horus, a weapon that had murdered an angel, became a blur of dark energy. It ripped and tore, shearing through golden ceramite as if it were parchment. One blow tore open the Emperor's side. Another shredded the muscles of his leg, forcing him to a knee. The mace, Worldbreaker, followed. It slammed into the Emperor's shoulder with the force of a tectonic plate shift, pulverizing the joint. The Emperor fought back, but his strikes were measured, his power throttled by the hope that he could excise the cancer without killing the patient. It was a fatal miscalculation. Horus drove his father back, step by agonizing step, across the blood-slicked deck. He was a storm of pure hatred, his every blow a curse made manifest. Finally, he saw his opening. With a final, triumphant roar that echoed with the voices of his dark masters, Horus lunged. The Talon of Horus plunged deep into the Emperor's chest, the crackling claws bursting through his back, severing his spine and rupturing organs that had sustained him for millennia. As the Emperor gasped, his lifeblood pouring onto the corrupted steel, Horus brought the mace down upon his skull. There was a sound like shattering rock. The Emperor's psychic halo flickered and died. He collapsed to the deck, a broken thing of gold and blood, his body ruined, his light extinguished. In the Empyrean, The four Chaos gods howled in ecstatic victory. On the deck of the Vengeful Spirit, the Emperor lay dying, his mind a maelstrom of pain and dawning horror. He finally understood. His love, his compassion, his refusal to believe his son was truly lost. That was the weapon Horus had used to kill him. He had doomed himself, and with him, all of humanity, because he could not bring himself to murder his own child. It was in this moment of absolute despair, with the Warmaster standing victorious over the fallen father, that a single figure stepped into the throne room. Accounts are lost to time, muddled by myth. Some say it was Alanius Pius, a common soldier of the Imperial army. Others claim it was a custodian, his golden armor rent and scorched. Still others insist it was a terminator of the Imperial fists, his duty inviolate to the last. The identity is irrelevant. What mattered was the act. A lone warrior, mortal and fragile, stepped between the broken body of his god and the triumphant arch-traitor. He raised his weapon, a simple laser gun, a guardian's spear, a storm bolter, and stood his ground. He stood against a god for his emperor. Horus looked down at this insect. A flicker of amusement crossed his face, a grotesque twisting of his features. He didn't even use his weapons. He simply looked at the man, and with a sliver of his borrowed power, he willed him to unexist. It was not a quick or merciful death. The warrior was flayed alive by psychic force, his skin peeling away, then his muscle, then his bones, turning to incandescent dust. But it didn't stop there. Horus reached into the man's very soul, into his past and future, and annihilated him utterly. He erased him from history, from memory, from the very fabric of reality. It was an act of such profound and casual cruelty, performed with a visible, shuddering joy. And the Emperor saw it all. Through his one remaining eye, past the agony and the ruin of his body, he witnessed it. He saw the glee Horus took in the complete and total destruction of a single, defiant soul. In that instant, the final, cherished lie shattered. The being standing before him was not his son. His son, Horus, was gone. He was not a passenger in his own body, not a prisoner of chaos. He was an absence, a void. What remained was a monster, a puppet of cosmic horrors, wearing his son's face like a suit of flesh. The love the Emperor had held for Horus, the love that had just cost him everything, finally, blessedly, died. And in its place, something cold, ancient, and absolute took root. The time for saving his son was over. It was time to destroy him. From the ruin of his body, something else rose. It was not healing. It was pure, unadulterated will, a force of psychic nature so potent it burned away the limitations of flesh and bone. The pain was a distant star, irrelevant. The love he had felt for his son was a dead galaxy, cold and dark. In its place was a terrible, silent calculus. He gathered the dregs of his life, the last embers of his 400-century existence, and focused them into a singular point of annihilation. The air in the chamber grew heavy, ionizing, tasting of ozone and imminent thunder. The corrupted metal of the deck groaned, not from physical weight, but from the sheer pressure of a god preparing to unmake a part of himself. He pushed himself upright, a being of shattered gold and leaking light, and raised his power gauntlet. It began to blaze, not with warmth, but with the cold, white-hot fury of a supernova. Horus saw it. Through the red haze of his master's power, he saw the weapon being forged. He saw his father, the broken emperor, become something else entirely, a conduit for a power that could unwrite reality. And for one fleeting microsecond, as the emperor's attack began its inexorable journey across the space between them, the chaos gods flinched. Whether from fear of this ultimate psychic expression, or from a final, cruel act of abandonment, they withdrew their power. They pulled their tendrils from Horus's soul, leaving him exposed, naked, and alone. In that silent, terrifying instant, Horus Lupercal returned. The haze vanished. The cacophony of demonic whispers died. The veil of lies was torn away, and he saw. He saw with his own eyes, for the first time in what felt like an eternity. He saw the angelic body of Sanguinius, his brother, broken and discarded at his feet. He saw the Vengeful Spirit, his flagship, not as a temple of righteous rebellion, but as a charnel house of weeping flesh and screaming steel. And he saw his father, not the tyrant of his visions, but the man who had found him on Chthoniya, the man who had raised him, loved him, and named him Warmaster. A man now broken, dying, and mutilated beyond all recognition. By his hand, the full, crushing weight of his heresy, of every murder, every betrayal, every burned world, fell upon him in a single, soul-crushing avalanche. A single tear, hot with a shame so absolute it could extinguish stars, traced a path through the grime on his cheek. It was not a tear of fear, it was a tear of recognition. The Emperor saw it too. His psychic sight, now honed to a razor's edge, pierced the veil and saw the return of his son. He felt the wave of absolute, perfect remorse wash over Horus. He felt the flicker of the boy he had raised, horrified and begging for a forgiveness that could never be. He saw his beloved son, trapped in the monster's flesh, finally awake and aware of the damnation he had wrought. And the Emperor's attack did not falter. He had to kill him. He had to kill his son, his returned, repentant son. This was his final, most terrible burden. He would not grant Horus a warrior's death against a monster. He would grant him the Emperor's judgment, father to son, knowing the son was finally home to receive it. The golden hand, blazing with the light of 1,000 suns, struck Horus. There was no sound. There was only a silent, expanding sphere of golden annihilation. It was not a blow that killed the body. It was a psychic fire that incinerated the soul, burning it from the fabric of the material and immaterial realms. It scoured every trace of Horus Lupercal from existence, ensuring that the ruinous powers could never reclaim their champion, never again fashion him into a weapon. It was an act of utter unmaking. When the light faded, nothing was left. Only the scorch mark on the deck, a shadow of the man who had been. The Emperor, his power spent, his body finally succumbing to its mortal wounds, collapsed once more. Moments later, the doors to the throne room were blasted open, and Rogel Dorn, Primarch of the Imperial Fists, entered. He found the body of an angel, the absence of a traitor, and the broken form of his father, the Emperor of mankind, clinging to the last threads of life. They carried him back to Terra. The Golden Throne, the device meant to be humanity's salvation, became its master's prison, a life support engine of arcane machinery and fathomless sorrow. It sustained the Emperor's shattered body, but his voice was silenced forever. He became a silent, decaying corpse, kept alive only by his own indomitable will and the daily sacrifice of 1,000 souls. The Imperium was saved, but its dream was dead. In the millennia that followed, the Emperor would be worshipped as the god he never wanted to be. Superstition and ignorance, the very things he fought to eradicate, became the state religion. The dark future the Chaos Gods had shown Horus, the lie that had fueled his rebellion, became the truth precisely because he had rebelled. The galaxy continues to burn, 10,000 years later, forever trapped in the echo of that final, tragic moment. A father's golden hand, reaching not to save, but to erase.